West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
A low blow from the Florida governor. Ron DeSantis today getting personal in his war of words with President Biden, questioning Biden's mental faculties after Biden dismissed DeSantis' vow to defy the administration's COVID guidelines. Let me play for you first what Biden said and DeSantis' response.
Governor who?
Why is that moratorium constitutional, Mr. President?
I guess I'm not surprised that Biden doesn't remember me. I guess the question is what else has he forgotten?
And the White House clearly leaning into this fight as well. Today, Biden's press secretary went right at the Florida governor and his campaign for, among other things, selling T-shirts saying things like, "Don't Fauci my Florida."
Not only is Governor DeSantis not abiding by public health decisions, he's fundraising off of this.
DeSantis has been trying to block Biden and his administration, overruling the CDC even when it comes to their science-based recommendations to beat back the virus.
There's been talk about potentially people advocating at the federal level imposing compulsory masks on kids. We're not doing that in Florida. What is he so upset about Florida? If you are trying to lock people down, I am standing in your way. Why don't you do your job? I don't want to hear a blip about COVID from you.
DeSantis might not want to hear a blip, but that doesn't change the reality that his state is suffering. Florida Justice now reporting it had more than 134,500 cases of COVID this week. That's the most cases in a week since the start of the pandemic. The state is also reporting 175 deaths over the past week. About 20% of new COVID cases across the country have been reported in Florida, a state with less than 7% of the U.S. population. And today, Maryland's Republican governor not missing an opportunity to also knock DeSantis for his response to the pandemic.
Well, the good news is here in Maryland, because we're so vaccinated, the virus is not spreading like the rest of the country. You were talking earlier about Florida, which had 21,800 cases in a day, and we had 500. They've got 10,000 people in the hospital. We have 300.
Look, political fights are just that, and they may benefit each of these politicians, Larry Hogan, Ron DeSantis, and Joe Biden. But what they don't do is get us any closer to getting us out of this pandemic. Arlette Saenz is traveling with the president. She's out front live in Wilmington, Delaware for us. Arlette, I know you've been talking to White House officials about this fight today. What are they telling you?
Well, Kate, White House officials aren't exactly outlining the next steps in this strategy of the war of words between the White House and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But the White House has demonstrated this willingness this week to call out those Republican governors like DeSantis, who they believe are making decisions that fly in the face of public health guidance. President Biden really set the tone for that early in the week when he's specifically responding to DeSantis and also Texas Governor Greg Abbott, saying that governors who won't implement mask or vaccine requirements should just move out of the way. And that is something that you really heard from White House officials as well this week, as you heard in that sound from White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, as she accused Ron DeSantis of playing politics instead of relying on public health guidance. But one thing that this White House understands when you talk to officials is that many of those decisions regarding masks and vaccine requirements are going to end up being made at the state level. The federal government can do as much as they can, but they're also going to highlight those Republican governors they believe are going on the right course. But we will see whether this war of words continues between the White House and DeSantis going forward.
Arlette, thank you so much. Out front with me now, Dana Bash, CNN's chief political correspondent and co-anchor of State of the Union, and Dr. Jonathan Reiner. He advised the White House medical team under President George W. Bush. Dana, is there any doubt in your mind what Ron DeSantis is doing by escalating this war of words?
No, there really isn't. And as you played in the intro, all the biggest tell for those of us who cover politics is whether or not a politician is trying to raise money off of the actions that they are engaging in. And the fact that Ron DeSantis is doing just that is the biggest tell. Aside from so many other political data points that fly in the face of what seems to be the medical and the scientific data points that are going on in Florida. The fact is that the hospitalization rates are skyrocketing and so on and so forth. And, it is a bit ironic that what the governor has done is issue a mandate that people can't, on a more local level in Florida, issue mandates. I mean, there is a bit of rich irony in that, don't you think, Kate? Yeah,
in the Republican tradition of valuing local control, yes, there is quite a bit of rich irony in that.
Exactly.
Dr. Reiner, Dan is talking about the reality on the ground when it comes to, forget the political talking points. I mean, Florida reported more COVID cases over the past week than any other 7-day period during the pandemic. And DeSantis is trying to ban mask mandates. He's stopping vaccine requirements from going in place. And honestly, again, forget the war of words. As a doctor, what do you say to the governor?
He needs to get his act together. Look, I think the primary role for a governor is to protect the health and welfare of his citizens, of the constituents that elected him, and all those people who live in his state. And right now in Florida, things are really bad. Every day in Florida, about another 1,000 people add to the already very high total of daily case rates. Right now in Florida, there are almost twice the number of daily cases in Florida as in the United States entirely on July 4th. And again, it's increasing by about 1,000 people per day. The governor only has three sort of tools at his disposal. He can get the public to mask up. He can mandate masks. He can get the public to increase their vaccination rate by essentially either mandating vaccines or empowering businesses to use vaccine passports. But he's refusing to do that. Or he can shut down. The governor of Florida has refused to do all three of those. The state is on fire. And if you prevent the fire department from coming to the rescue of a house fire, that house is going to burn to the ground. And that's what's happening in Florida now.
It's interesting because Andy Slavitt said to me this week that it's almost like these governors are getting caught being too cute by half, because they could put these things in place, these bans on mandates, when all the case counts were on the decline and it looked like we were moving out of the pandemic. And now they're caught in it when things are not that, and they're not dealing with the reality in large part. Dana, we know that DeSantis is likely a top Republican presidential contender in 24. Biden knows this as well. Why do you think the Biden team and Joe Biden himself is engaging in this public fight? Doesn't it just elevate Ron DeSantis?
It does. It absolutely does. But look, the reality is what it is on the ground. And this isn't necessarily a fight. Well, this definitely isn't a fight about a run-of-the-mill policy difference. This is a fight about life or death, and about not just Ron DeSantis's constituents, but the President of the United States. He's in charge of everybody in this country, and I understand, the local versus federal and all of that, but that is the reality here. And, if you look at one of the neighboring states, Arkansas, Governor Asa Hutchinson, he arguably is from a much more conservative, much redder state than Florida, which has obviously been trending much more red recently. And he signed legislation saying that there won't be a mask mandate, and he now regrets it, and he's saying so publicly. One of the differences between the two of them, if you look at the raw politics, is that Asa Hutchinson is term limited. He's not running again in that state. So he's maybe more free to say what he thinks is best and for the public good and for his constituents' health and welfare, rather than Ron DeSantis, who, by the way, whether or not he's looking at 2024, also, if that doesn't happen, is looking at the next election in his state to remain governor.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And honestly, it could be as simple as exactly what you laid out, and it is so sad because Hutchinson is term limited out, and DeSantis is running for re-election of some kind. Dr. DeSantis is continuing, as Dana pointed out, to fundraise on this in his state, out of the state when he's traveling and fundraising, selling this merchandise. Beyond what this does in a political sense, does this kind of stuff have a real consequence right now?
Look, what's happening on the ground in Florida right now is that the consequences of the governor's actions is basically creating a situation where all of the hospitals are filling with COVID patients. And pretty soon, all over Florida, elective procedures will cease. It'll be harder to do emergency non-COVID procedures or treat non-COVID patients. People are going to start to feel the pain of this pandemic in Florida. And the governor, I think, has painted himself into a corner. He's going to have to enact either mask mandates or he's going to have to start closing bars and restaurants down because hospitals are going to be overrun.
It is Monday, the 9th of August of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right. We take the weekend and we slice it, we dice it, we reconstitute it into, well, hopefully something approaching gourmet delights. Indeed. It's Monday, River City Hash Mondays. How are you? Well. We have an infrastructure bill hanging in the balance. Now, does anyone really think that the Republicans are going to allow Joe Biden to have a win? Please. They're going to be loosey with the football, and at the very last second, they're going to pull that football out from the swinging foot, like they always do. And we have, what are they called? Vaccine skeptics? I think that they're actually called assets to a hostile foreign power bent on destroying America. If they're not assets, they are certainly useful idiots. I keep hearing all these stories about right-wing extremist types who railed against the whole protocols and measures to address the pandemic, from wearing masks to social distancing, getting the vaccine, all of it denials, anti-vax. And now they're dying. And on their deathbeds, they are pleading with folk to listen, this is serious. I made a mistake. And there's a lot of them dying because apparently people aren't listening. Once you've been brainwashed, it doesn't really matter anymore now, does it? Your own son. Here's a crazy story of how brainwashing works. This guy's son, survived the Stoneman Douglas shootout, massacre. I mean, it was on the news. Kids were traumatized. The cops came to the school. This guy's dad does not believe that it happened. It was a false flag operation, and his son was a crisis actor. And there are elements out there who say brainwashing doesn't work. Well, yeah, it does. And there's one right there. The guy fell into Q. He had already had a predisposition for right-wing lunacy already, according to his son. But when the pandemic hit, I guess all he had to do was find, some confirmation bias. And he found it. And now he believes his son is part of a nefarious plot to take away our guns. All right. Pretty crazy stuff. I would consider that child abuse, but apparently, this is in Florida, apparently they're going to give that father a medal. So, of course, we had at the top old Ron DeSantis. He just want to hear a blip from Joe. Well, Ron, in a just world, you would be going to jail for murder. At least manslaughter. At least. But we don't live in a just world. We live in a world in which the bullies blame the victims. Now, I've mentioned that my sister, the registered nurse, fully vaccinated, by the way, caught COVID. She's still recuperating from it right now. She hasn't had her full 10 days of quarantine. It's coming up. But my maggot brother, the young one, who either got kicked out of school or dropped out of school. He got kicked out of regular school, had to go to continuation high school. But by dint of the fact that he came out of that, became a used car salesman for a local dealership, was successful at that to the point where he opened up some of his own dealerships, then owned the second largest wholesale auction in Southern California. Because he's made a lot of money, he believes that he has been blessed by God. A used car salesman blessed by God. Usually when you say used car salesman, you think crook. And you would be correct. So my maggot brother, and yeah, I'm going to dish some family biz here because it pisses me off, because this is how the brainwashing works. Now, I love my brother. Yeah, because he's my brother. But let's just put it this way. He was never the studious type. He has innate intelligence. If he had been disciplined as a youngster, maybe he wouldn't be the way he is now. My brother would have been a great athlete, but he couldn't be coached. Just could not listen to anybody. Nobody. But he was a juvenile delinquent, and I am not kidding you. Girls loved him, though. I wonder why. They always like the bad boys. And he's a big guy. You know, he's big and cute. Went into Hollywood. Became an actor. Later in life, after he'd run these used car dealerships for a while, which he still sort of does now. Sells muscle cars on spec, specialty muscle cars. Anyway, he went on a public forum on Facebook and others and railed against my sister as an example of what the Democrats do. Telling everybody they got to mask up. Telling everybody they got to wash their hands. Telling everybody they got to have the vaccine. And then look at this Democrat, my sister, she caught the thing. Not once acknowledging that she works in a hospital, in respiratory therapy as a registered nurse. So he used my sister as a foil for some sort of brainwashing that he picked up from Russia. He wanted to be a cop. But even the cops here in Oregon, and they're not, I got to tell you, the cops in Oregon are pretty right-wing. They didn't let my brother become a cop. Went through the academy. When he graduated, they wouldn't even let him wear a uniform. He had to go in a suit and tie. The only one there. Now, I know it's wrong to air family business. But this is what has happened. They have created a civil war. They have split families apart. And now the demand is that we have to be nicer to them. When the first thing out of my brother's mouth about his sister is to use her as a foil for how the Democrats are hypocrites. My sister is a registered nurse. She's working on the front lines. And not only that, in respiratory. Could have said something nice. Could have said that she's a hero and look what happens. Even if you're not careful, even in these controlled spaces, you got to be careful. This is a lesson for all of us. And the only lesson he wanted to impart was pretty much eliminationist rhetoric. If that's the way it's going to be brother against brother, so be it. The time to be nice has long passed. Portland last night, or over the weekend, was overrun by Proud Boy brown shirts. Not a cop to be seen. Came with guns, IEDs, mace, tear gas, clubs, body armor. Not a cop to be seen because the cops are in cahoots with the brown shirts. When we say defund the police, we mean denazify them. In fact, I would just say denazify the police. Apparently, defund the police is a bridge too far for these nincompoops to be able to comprehend the nuance. Yeah, denazify the police. I said it. They are there. Any cop who has a 3% tattoo, they're out. Out. All right. I'm sorry for being so, forthright about these problems inside the family, but I think it's a prime example of what is going on. There's no convincing them. All we can do is stand against it. If you punch a Nazi now, hopefully we won't have to worry about the Nazis in the future. It's just whenever we say, oh, it's untoward to punch the Nazi, we can't even use the rhetoric. Let me assure you, that tact will not work. That tact will lead to ruin. Okay. What's on the rest of the menu here? Yes, we do have a curated show, and I guess I could go on ranting about this stuff. But we do have a curated show. We took the time to actually look for some stories that might be of import, that might have fallen through the cracks even. And that's why we're here. We're a backstop for it. Well, that was DeSantis at the top. He had fired back at Biden with a low blow in their escalating war of words. Yeah, what else has Joe forgotten? Hey, you know what, DeSantis? You're exactly like my maggot brother. Exactly like it. You're a bully. All their solution is to threaten to beat you up. Yeah, they can try. On the rest of the menu, Census experts are puzzled by the high rate of unanswered questions after Trump's xenophobic attack on the decennial count. Yeah, decennial count. The pandemic set off a deadly rise in speeding that hasn't stopped. I didn't know about that. And transportation officials have closed an important 46-mile stretch of Interstate 70 because of Colorado mudslides. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a rescue ship carrying 257 migrants docked at a Sicilian port. And the Democratic Republic of Congo suspended the director of the conservation agency responsible for protecting the country's UNESCO-listed national parks over possible embezzlement charges. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page, right there by the social media scroll, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. And now if you would look across the page to the left, hopefully you'll notice the Patreon link. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage helps us pay our bills. And if you could afford to buy an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds our way once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars really beyond compare. And we have a lot of experience at that. 10 years to be exact. Well, over 10 years to be even more exact. And anyway, we stretch those dollars beyond compare. We pay our bills. We fly under the radar and continue this resistance against this hostile takeover of the United States by hostile foreign powers and hostile domestic ones too. And we thank you for your generosity, and we also thank you ahead of time for generosity in the future because we need it. Anyway, thank you so much. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank him for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I really try to get it linked up on social media platforms like Twitter before showtime, but sometimes it's when the audio clip at the top is going on sometimes. But yeah, follow me at Twitter at Justice Putnam for those show notes and links. They're very important. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please, please, please pick up and review podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays, is by Mike Schneider from the Associated Press. Census Bureau statisticians and outside experts are trying to unravel a mystery. Why were so many questions about households in the 2020 census left unanswered? Wow, I have some suspicions. Now, residents did not respond to a multitude of questions about sex, race, Hispanic background, family relationships, and age, even when providing account of the number of people living in the home. According to documents released by the agency, and statisticians had to fill in the gaps. Reflecting an early stage in the number crunching, the documents show that 10% to 20% of questions were not answered in the 2020 census, depending on the question and the state. According to the Census Bureau, later phases of the processing show the actual rates were lower. The rates have averaged 1% to 3% in 170 years of previous U.S. census. And the information is important because data with demographic details will be used for drawing congressional and legislative districts. Oh, really? The data, which the Census Bureau will release this Thursday, also is used to distribute $1.5 trillion in federal spending each year. The documents, made public in response to an open records request from a Republican redistricting advocacy group, did not shed much light on why questions were left unanswered, though theories abound, and I've got my own. Some observers say software used in the first census, in which most Americans would respond online, allowed people to skip questions. Others say the pandemic made it harder to reach people who did not respond. Confusion over some questions, including traditional uncertainty among Hispanics about how to answer the race questions, may have been a factor, but some experts hint at a more sinister possibility. I guess I'm an expert in that. They say the Trump administration's attempt to end the count early and failed efforts to put a citizenship question on the form and exclude people who were in the U.S. illegally had a chilling effect. If I was the editor Now, I know the AP style manual doesn't really stipulate this, but if I was the editor for this article, I would have struck the illegally part and put in undocumented. Thank you. Back to the article at hand. I think it's the pandemic and Trump. The very threat that citizenship was on the questionnaire, the very notion it might have been on it, may have deterred some Latinos from filling it out, said Andrew Beveridge, a sociologist at Queens College and the City University of New York Graduate School and University Center. I think a lot of us are flabbergasted by it, he said. It is a very high number. Ruggles initially thought it had to do with the software used by people who answered online, about 2/3 of U.S. households. Other countries, such as Australia and Canada, have used similar software for censuses. Shouldn't it be censusi? And saw the number of unanswered questions drop to almost zero because respondents couldn't proceed if they didn't answer a question. I guess in the U.S. version, they must just have accepted incomplete responses, Ruggles said. If the non-response rate was consistently high across responses mode, that is very strange. Acting Census Bureau Director Ron Jarman said recently in a blog post that the blank answers spanned all categories of questions and all modes of responding, online, by paper, by phone, or face-to-face interviews. These blank responses left holes in the data which we had to fill, Jarman said. In a statement last week to the AP, Jarman declined to go into details, saying only that the Bureau would release updated rates later this month, quote, based on the correct numbers, end quote. To fill in the holes, Census Bureau statisticians search other administrative records such as tax forms, Social Security card applications, or previous censuses to find people's race, age, sex, and Hispanic background. The available records didn't turn up the information needed, if the available records didn't turn up the information needed, they turned to the statistical technique called imputation that the Census Bureau has used for 60, that would be 60 years. The technique has been challenged and upheld in courts after past censuses. In some cases, statisticians looked for information answered about one member of a family, such as race, and applied it to another member that had blank answers, or they assigned a sex based on the respondent's first name. In other cases, when the entire household had no information, they filled it in using data of similar neighbors. Imputation has been shown to improve data quality and accuracy compared to leaving these fields blank or without information from respondents, Census Bureau official Roberto Ramirez and Christine Borman wrote recently in a blog post. The Census Bureau in April released state population totals from the 2020 census, and they are used to divvy up the number of congressional seats in each state during a once-a-decade process known as apportionment. And we know it also as gerrymandering, which the Republicans have used with expert precision to destroy the democratic process. Sharp of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Motorists put the pedal to the metal during the pandemic, and police are worried as roads get busy with the final stretch of summer travel. The latest data shows the number of highway deaths in 2020 was the greatest in more than a decade, even though cars and trucks drove fewer miles during the pandemic. Summer is an incredibly dangerous time, and it culminates with Labor Day, that last hurrah, said Pam Shadell-Fisher of the Governor's Highway Safety Association. Traffic data indicates the higher death toll was related to higher average speeds in conjunction with more of those on the roads driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and a slight decline in seatbelt use. And motorists do not seem to be slowing down. People are flying down the roads, Maine State Police Corporal Doug Cropper said of the summer traffic on Interstate 95. It is just ridiculous, he exclaimed. Tickets issued by the CHP, we know that is the California Highway Patrol, by the way, for speeding in excess of 100 miles per hour from January to June were nearly double pre-pandemic levels. More than 100 miles per hour. And the number of tickets for reckless driving citations grew as well. In New York State, the percentage of fatalities for which speeding was the primary cause and the total number of speeding tickets grew from January through June compared to the year before the pandemic. With police distracted by civil disobedience, and scaling back routine stops for safety, the lightly traveled roads quickly turned into the Wild West in many places. Is that the reason? Come on. In New York, supercars like Ferraris and Lamborghinis blazed down empty streets with roaring engines disturbing residents trying to sleep. Motorists from coast to coast were ticketed at eye-watering speeds. Several lead-footed motorists took advantage to set new records on an illegal non-stop race from coast to coast called the Cannonball Run. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration sounded the warning early in the pandemic about speeding and reckless driving. The agency expected fatalities to decline with fewer miles driven, similar to previous declines during economic downturns, but the fatalities grew throughout the pandemic and even picked up steam in the latter part of the year. Thomas Piepert, writing for the AP, brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. As ominous storm clouds gathered in western Colorado over a large area blackened by a recent wildfire, torrential rain fell and the charged land stripped of vegetation gave way, sending a rush of mud and boulders tumbling down steep canyon walls and onto a major highway. The July 29 mudslides stranded more than 100 people in their vehicles overnight and caused extensive damage that closed Interstate 70, capping several weeks of perilous conditions in a scenic canyon carved through the mountains by the Colorado River. It marked the latest in a string of closures over the past 2 years for an area that serves as a key transportation corridor between the Rocky Mountains and the West Coast. Each forced long detours for semi-trailers that deliver fuel and food, and inflicted economic pain on businesses that cater to tourists in the popular summer destination of Glenwood Springs. The closures illustrate the kind of damage scientists have long warned can follow wildfires made worse by climate change, dangerous mudslides caused by rain in burn-scarred terrain. Though no injuries were reported, such slides have caused deaths and destruction in recent years in California, and other parts of the U.S. West. Those who live and work in the Glenwood Canyon area have been adjusting to the inconveniences of closures for years, but mudslides have become more frequent and intense since the Grizzly Creek fire scorched about 50 square miles last summer. Transportation officials have closed a 46-mile stretch of the interstate and are telling motorists traveling between Denver and Glenwood Springs on the west end of the canyon to take another route that adds about 250 miles to the trip. Meanwhile, long-haul truckers have been advised to detour north onto Interstate 80 through Wyoming until the canyon is reopened, which could take weeks. On average, thousands of commercial vehicles travel daily on the interstate through the canyon, according to transportation officials. Much of the fuel, food, and other products that are distributed in the western part of the state comes from Denver via I-70, and the detours are adding several hours to each trip. In some cases, that means truckers cannot make the round trip without running afoul of federal limits on how long they can be behind the wheel. This is a ripple effect because we're not getting the truck back until the next day. It takes it out of sync in terms of those drivers, and effectively, you need more drivers and more trucks, said an official who warned that the delays could lead to gas and food shortages, late deliveries, and higher prices. The mudslides also have significantly impacted tourism in Glenwood Springs, which typically attracts thousands of visitors this time of year for its hiking, biking, fishing, and other outdoor activities. Well, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, all you have to say is M. Night Shyamalan before critics take sides. Is it The Sixth Sense or is it The Last Airbender? Well, no one will accuse his new film, Old, of not having an enticing premise. A group of tropical vacationers find themselves trapped on a beach where time is accelerated, leading to children becoming adults over the course of hours, and adults, especially those with underlying medical conditions, succumbing to their maladies. The key that unlocks all is planted early and sustained, maybe a bit over well, and Shyamalan does a decent job of slowly ramping up the weird. But problems start when he gets into the examination of the human condition part of the proceedings, which, as fans of The Twilight Zone can attest, is where many of its episodes turn to sap. The standard was lower there, of course, because they had 22 minutes to work with and no budget. Here, though, we get an especially clunky script that attempts to deal with racial paranoia. By the way, who thought up the name of the rapper on the beach, mid-sized sedan? Then we have a newly adolescent boy and girl discovering sexual feelings, which, if done right, can be touching. See Moonrise Kingdom, or in another kind of movie, hilarious. Here, though, it's just cringeworthy. And when we see a vain, middle-aged female character losing her looks, we're almost to skit territory. There's credible cinematography here. It's a scenic locale in the DR, but the shooting with weird cropping and angles seems designed solely to amp up the strange, which unfortunately starts to seem necessary. Standard comeuppance awaits at the terminus of Old, while a seemingly important issue is left to the side. There's two adults who were little kids the day before. Uh-oh, he's not thinking sequel. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
He's running first, second, third. No! He stopped between third and home. What the heck?
Ooh, that's not the time to stop. And now's not the time to stop wearing a mask. Vaccines are a game changer, but the game's not over. Mask up until you're vaccinated. Let's finish strong. For more information, please visit cdc.gov/masks. A message by CDC and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
On January 6, 2021, America experienced an attempted insurrection, and that assault on democracy in a different form continues today.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Shortly after the insurrection was quelled, members of President Trump's party condemned him for fostering and aiding and abetting the coup. But no longer. The days of condemnation are gone, replaced with a campaign of disinformation bolstered by the acquiescence of silence. That campaign has described the armed insurrection as a normal, peaceful tourist visit, absolves those who said they wanted to kill the Speaker of the House and hang the Vice President, claims with no basis that the Speaker of the House bears responsibility for the attack, insists that the 500 or so persons accused of crimes, entitled of course to a presumption of innocence, for their participation in the assault on the Capitol are victims, and opposes any investigation into what happened on January 6th. Here's the most frightening part. There's no guarantee that the American democratic experiment will continue. The right to vote is at grave risk, and therefore, so is democracy itself. The time to act to preserve democratic institutions is now. To paraphrase the aphorism often attributed to the 18th century Irish statesman Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for men and women of good will to do nothing.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
A recent headline blared, "Labor shortages end when wages rise." Gosh, Captain Obvious, what an amazing discovery. Someone notify the Nobel Prize Committee, for surely this revolutionary revelation will win this year's prize in economics. Better yet, someone notify that gaggle of Republican governors whose theory of labor economics begins and ends with the medieval demand that workers be whacked with a stick to make them do what the bosses want. At issue is the furious complaint by restaurant chains, nursing homes, big ag, and other low-wage employers that they have a critical labor shortage. It seems that millions of workers today are hesitant to take jobs because there's no affordable child care, or the jobs they're offered expose them and their families to COVID-19, or the work itself is abusive and demeaning, or all of the above. Business chieftains wail that they've been advertising thousands of jobs for waiters, poultry workers, nursing assistants, and such, but they can't get enough takers. So corporate-serving governors have rushed to their rescue, shouting, "Whack 'em with a stick!" These mingy politicians are stripping away jobless benefits, trying to force workers to take any crappy job they're offered. It gives new meaning to the term workforce. But wait, there's an honest way to get the workers they need. Offer fair wages. As the owner of a small chain of restaurants in Atlanta notes, when he stopped lowballing wages, he not only got the workers he needed, but we started to get a better quality of applicants. That translated to better service, happier customers, and more business. This is Jim Hightower saying, if you treat employees as cheap, that's what you'll get. But if you view them as valuable assets, that's what they'll be, and you'll all be better off. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by our new Lowdown Happy Hour, now live streaming on Facebook from the Chat and Chew Cafe, with kick-ass political spark plugs like Beto O'Rourke, musical champions like Marcia Ball, and grassroots change makers like the New Georgia Project and People's Action. The Lowdown Happy Hour is reaching out to you to help put the move in movement. So grab a libation and join the fun. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1965. That was the day 53 construction tradesmen were killed in a fire at the Titan II ICBM launch complex near Searcy, Arkansas. It is considered one of the worst industrial accidents at a U.S. nuclear weapons facility. The complex was one of 4 sites containing Titan II missiles. Each missile weighed 340,000 pounds, measuring 103 feet in length and 10 feet in diameter. President Johnson had just committed more troops to the Vietnam War. The Air Force had hoped to strengthen the silo against a possible Soviet attack. They had contracted with Peter Kiewit and Son of Colorado to bring in electricians, carpenters, millwrights, painters, and pipe fitters for a number of tasks. Crews worked to shore up the silo, improve the blast doors, adjust hydraulics, and install emergency lighting. 52 of the 55 workers on all 9 levels of the silo were almost immediately asphyxiated when it suddenly filled with smoke and heat. The Air Force determined a welder on level 2 had accidentally pierced a high-pressure hydraulic line, igniting the fire. Investigators also concluded that the silo lacked adequate ventilation, alternative exits, and independent power sources. The contractor was held responsible for numerous safety violations, contributing to unsafe work conditions. The welder was found drowned in hydraulic fluid. 2 survivors suffered burns and smoke inhalation. They contested the Air Force's findings. One worker insisted no one had been welding on level 2. The other survivor stated he saw flames burst from the diesel engine just before the power went out. Both men insisted the fire started from below. By 1981, 2 more deadly accidents involving Titan II missiles would prompt President Reagan to order their deactivation.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting to be warmer than we were over the weekend. Looks like we should be in the mid to upper 90s, partly cloudy skies. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. We are currently under an active heat advisory as the heat increases gradually through the week. And when I say gradually, I mean pretty fast. It looks like we're going to be about 110 by the middle of the week, or hotter. Clear skies overnight with lows in the mid-60s. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Generally sunny tomorrow with highs over 100. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon continue to rise terribly fast also. Now, these are not updated totals over the weekend. This is just from the end of Friday. We have increased, it looks like 70 just overnight from Thursday to Friday, so expect hundreds when this finally gets updated tomorrow late. Confirmed cases right now are at 134,038, and the deceased have increased to 164. Updated totals may happen by tomorrow's show, but certainly by the end of the day tomorrow. Grass pollen is rated as moderate right outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is moderate at 57 parts per million. So if you have breathing problems, wear a mask or stay inside with filtered air. And the daytime UV index is very high at 8. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.02 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles. And relative humidity is at 76%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 68 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 71 and cloudy. Rome is 85 and fair with a heat advisory of their own. Kyiv is 87 and fair. Kabul is 83 and fair. Hong Kong is 78 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 83, partly cloudy with heavy wind. Sydney, Australia is 56 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and cloudy. And New York is a pleasant 75 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A ship carrying 257 migrants docked in the Italian port of Trapani on Saturday, almost a week after rescuing the people from international waters off Tunisia. Migrants aboard the vessel, mainly men from Morocco, Bangladesh, Egypt, and Syria, waved and applauded as the ship, run by the German organization Sea-Watch, approached the port of Trapani on the Italian island of Sicily. One sat on the deck and held up a sign which read, "Italy Good." The migrants were tested for COVID-19 before being transferred onto a quarantine ship where they are expected to stay for 2 weeks as a precaution against the spread of the coronavirus.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mais automne, quand les feuilles tombent partout, si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Democratic Republic of Congo's Environment Ministry has suspended the director of the Nature Conservation Agency responsible for protecting the country's UNESCO-listed national parks. There was no immediate comment from the Environment Ministry, but a senior government official confirmed the suspension of Cosma Wilagula, director of the Congo Institute for Nature Conservation. The letter from the ministry, dated July 7th, informs Wilagula of a suspension but does not give an explanation. Speaking on condition of anonymity, the official said the move was linked to the suspected embezzlement of tourism revenue from Rwanda relating to Virunga National Park in eastern Congo and other corruption concerns. Wingagula did not respond to a request for comment. The letter named an interim director but did not specify if his suspension was permanent. Virunga sits on the forest-covered volcanoes of Central Africa and is home to over half the global population of mountain gorillas. It is Africa's oldest national park and largest tropical rainforest reserve, covering 3,000 square miles. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.